Marisol, you may begin.
Thank you, Tony. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session of Global Logistics Update. My name is Marisol Tres Palacios. I am the Director of the Commercial Service, USIAC, the U.S. Export Assistance Center. And today, we are joined by Kelly Raya. But before we do that, there are just a few logistical things that we want, of course, to alert you about. Please keep your camera off, put your microphone on mute, unless we are in the Q&A session, which will be at the end. The last 10 minutes, we'll be reserving those for questions. You can also write your questions in the chat box or raise your hand if you want to interact with the speakers and us. So that is it for the logistics. And now let me introduce you our great speaker today, with whom I've worked plenty of times in the past. It's Kelly Raya. She is a licensed customs house broker and a trade compliance specialist working for numerous companies, assisting them in managing their import and export trade activities. She's a specialist in both import and export compliance, logistics, purchasing, global sourcing, and supply chain management. Many companies depend upon her expertise in facilitating their export sales or import purchasing from an operational perspective. She does much of this counseling through an organization, a company called Blue Tiger International, which is based in New York, where she is the vice president of trade compliance. She works on a number of projects and provides in-depth expertise in a number of global trade areas, especially one-on-one training for individuals seeking their customs brokerage license, typically arranged through their organization. She's also involved with numerous companies as their outsourced trade compliance manager. And to top it up, she also has her own company called Dragonfly Global. It's a 100% woman-owned entity working with corporate America, where diversity is a necessary focus on the delivery of her and her associated business services. So without further ado, please, Kelly Raya, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisol, and good morning, everyone. Anthony, next slide, please. So, if we were to have a polling question that stated how many people are affected by global supply chain, I think every one of us would have to say we are affected by it. I think if we walked around the block in our building or in our neighborhood, we would have that same response, right? Everyone is being affected by this disruption. So today we're going to speak a little bit about, the issues that we're running into, and then some where there may be hope and some other options that are available there. What have people been doing from a creative standpoint in kind of rethinking how to do things? So to get us started, what I like to do is just talk a little bit about, well, what's going on, right? There is this tremendous disruption taking place, and it's affecting those of us who import, those of us who export, and not only that, the people who don't. Anyone involved in the domestic supply chain are also feeling the effects of this disruption right now. Manufacturers, distributors, consumers, and not just speaking about individual consumers like us as on our personal side, but on the business level, anyone who is bringing in raw materials, finished goods, whatever it may be, right? We're all feeling this disruption. And a lot of this is coming from the initial knee-jerk reaction last March 2020 when things shut down. What did we have? Well, no one was prepared. And part of that reaction was to start to hoard a little bit, right? Whether it was materials that we felt that maybe would be a little bit slower to come in so that we can't perform our manufacturing without a specific chemical or without a specific component. So maybe we started to build up our inventories a little bit on that. So we see businesses carrying higher inventories than they did before, grabbing onto more inventory, and things really only got worse. And if we think about it, when we talk about businesses taking on this additional inventories, On the personal side, how many of us are hoarding paper towels, toilet paper, maybe even diapers, depending on how old your children are, right? Just in case. It really has been a tremendous disruption, and it's not only affecting every business, but it really does affect each of us on an individual basis. And it's not just the United States. This is a global issue. We're seeing the impact of the supply chain affecting ports and imports going into other countries, from not just Asia, but Europe to the US, and Asia to other countries, because the issue is that there's just a basic disruption. The whole system has kind of fallen down, right? We're all aware of that. So let's talk a little bit about the immediate impact we're seeing right now, and then also, again, try to offer some hope. Next slide. So when we think about the delays, that's one issue, right? Things, I go into my grocery store, I go into Target or Walmart, the shelves are a little emptier than they have been. That's the freight delays. But there's another issue that's going on here also, is that the cost of freight and the ocean freight, the air freight, has continued to go up. And eventually we will see that as consumers. I know my grocery shopping bill, weekly bill, has gone up tremendously, it seems. What's gone on here is that the transportation has really shut down, and that inventory replacement and getting the goods onto the shelves, well, the carriers are taking a little bit of advantage of that, right? They have the ability to say, well, demand is high here, supply is short, even with getting space on vessels, space on airlines to move the cargo. Let's bump up those prices. So we're running into that. So we're not only having the delays, but then that we're having the costs that are associated with the demand and supply of the availability of transportation, and all of that leading to, again, uncertainty. What are we going to do? Where is this going to go? When you look at the cost of these containers, it's just absolutely phenomenal to me. And I've been involved in logistics for almost 40 years to see this happening. You know, we never would have thought that. However, when you look at this perfect storm that happens, I guess anything can happen. All right, so what are things that we can think about, or things that we can think about to try to move this along? So next slide, please. When we look at how our demand planning and our procurement and our sales and customer service, right, all the different areas of our company are affected by this, right? The cost escalations, the uncertainty, the lack of inventory. What we need to figure out is, how can we be better informed of what options are available to us? And what we're seeing is a number of different things. We have people saying, well, what we'll do is we'll try to control the costs by, how do you control those costs, right? From $27.50 a container up to $17,000, right? You can't really control that cost, but maybe we control some of the expenses within the company by taking advantage of other programs that the government has and things such as that. We can't impact the specific delays and the specific costs. So if we look to see, well, how can we offset that? So part of that has to do with finding out, do we have the ability to maybe create a foreign trade zone in our facility? Or can we utilize a bonded warehouse? Do we have the ability to perhaps collect drawback on imports? So if we have imports that are coming into the US and we're paying duties to customs, maybe we have an opportunity to recoup those duties if we're exporting those goods out, or if we have components that are coming in and you're manufacturing something. Drawback gives us the ability to recoup some of those duties back, all right? Now that's not taking care of the delays or the immediate costs we have here, but it's a way to try to offset some of these expenses that we have. And if we look at foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses, those are tools that we can use to defer duties and taxes, right? That's goods are coming in, and if we are able to put them into a foreign trade zone bonded warehouse, we don't pay the duties until the goods come out of that bonded facility. Or if the goods are exported from the US, we don't pay any duties or taxes. We send that right back out, and we keep the cash flow going, which is great because that can help us offset some of the costs that we're experiencing on the other part of the equation here. So there are tools that are available to us and to try to figure out how to offset, because we may not be able to solve the immediate problem at this point in time, but maybe through thinking through where we have some opportunities to recoup those costs, we could think about where do those lie for us. So next slide, please. I do want to mention a couple of companies that we've worked with. Well, actually, let me start with. So when we look at the sustainability of our business models, the growth margins, and fulfill client orders and needs, okay, well, that's all part of demand planning. And when we look at the ISM, and that's the Institute for Supply Chain Management, they actually put together surveys based on information from many different companies, hundreds of companies. And from the anticipated demand planning levels from from public companies, the anticipated demand is that this is going to continue for a while, right? This is not changing. So we need to really think about what other options do we have. And we've come across some clients and companies that are doing some creative moves. And it's kind of interesting to think of them, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But this is not ending anytime soon. So we're going to have continued growth. This is going to continue. This issue is going to continue. When people aren't saying, well, let's shut down the demand planning, right? If your company goes out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, however long it may be, this is going to continue. And ISM, well, that's a more of a US-based organization. We're seeing the same information coming out from the steamship lines as to what they're anticipating in the next 6 to 12 months also, as far as demand goes on vessels. So what I'd like to do is just discuss a couple of creative solutions we run into. And if you could hit the next slide, please. Thank you. So many companies, when you're involved with freight forwarders and customs brokers, your transportation providers, whoever that may be, and it may be through those forwarders and brokers, what a lot of companies do is they want to leverage their spend. I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket with this freight forwarder, with this transportation company, because they're going to give me the best service, right? And what we're finding is that the companies that have done that have really put themselves at a disadvantage now, because that company is being pulled at by all of their other customers that have the same issues, right? So what we're seeing some companies do, which is not something I would normally recommend to people, is to give a little bit of piece of your business to many different forwarders. Why is that? Well, if you're giving it to a lot of different people, you have a better options, more available options, because you're kind of spreading out those shipments. So instead of relying only on one transportation provider, reaching out to many and trying to leverage yourself that way through using more than one carrier. A lot of companies will also, in the past, have moved from forwarder to forwarder, right, to get the lowest rate, because again, for our bottom line, we want to reduce our operating expenses, right, our transportation expenses as much as possible. And again, we're seeing that many companies have run into issues with having done that in the past, because no one wants to move anything for them. So one option is to try to use multiple transportation companies. Now, let's say that you're someone who's moving freight by full container loads. If you were to break, and it's going to sound again like very controversial idea, breaking down those containers and moving them as LCL will give you an opportunity that instead of waiting for that space for the one container, you can get a little bit of cargo out on this container, a little bit of cargo out on that container, and in doing so, get the freight moving. So it's kind of To me, it's the anti-freight move to make. But when you think about it, it actually does make sense, right? That gives you more options. Another company that we work with and has come up with, I think, a very unique solution. Most ocean freight moves containerized, right? 20 foot or 40 foot or 50, whatever you have, right? But you have a nice big container and you stuff in all of your stuff in there. Maybe you have full container loads. Again, is in the past, that's the more efficient way, and your cargo moves a little bit more safely that way, right? It's protected by those steel walls. But if we think about that, before freight moved containerized, freight used to move break bulk, where there were pallets being loaded onto vessels and not protected by those containers, wrapped, on boxes, wrapped in shrink wrap and protected on a pallet and moving cargo that way. What we're finding are a number of importers that are now moving cargo via break bulk. And again, sounds like a crazy idea, but there's availability. And again, taking the cargo out of the container. Obviously, not all cargo is going to be fit this model to try to work with this way, to work it this way. But if we were to do that with the moving to break bulk, it's another option that we have available. So I wanted to mention that as well. Next slide, please. So just to kind of wind things down a little bit, we're getting to our 20 minutes. This is going to be a continued state of disruption. And I actually found a great quote last week when I was reading something that said, it's a perfect storm of ugliness. Wow, that really describes the situation very well. So if you have management saying to you, why isn't my cargo moving? No, you don't get it. This is the perfect storm of ugliness. But thinking a little bit outside the box, maybe our cargo isn't suitable for this break bulk solution, or we're tied in and we cannot get away from our forwarders that we're using. Well, then think about how can we recoup some of these potential, additional expenses that we're incurring through these other solutions, right? With whether it's drawback or the use of foreign trade zones, bonded warehousing. And it's really important just to keep watching, keep reading, keep trying to find out what resources are out there to try to get as much information as possible. Because as we know, this is going to continue. This is not ending anytime soon. And it'll be very interesting to see what goes on in the next months, and I would probably venture to say almost the next year ahead. Another thing is keep in touch with your service providers. Now, your customs brokers don't want to hear, why didn't my container unload? They don't have control over those vessels, right? They don't have like a little, what the heck is that thing called? Can't think of the name of it, that little device. They don't have one of those devices that can go onto the line and just pull up your container, a drone. They don't have a drone that can go on the container and bring you your cargo, okay? Yet. They don't have one that can lift that whole container yet. There are reasons for all these delays. And, whether and I'll just mention, Port of Long Beach, if that opens up, is that an option will that reduce all of this? This is not a one-shot problem. It's not just the port not being open. We're seeing the delay in the availability of containers that were rerouted. We're seeing a lack of chassis. We're seeing a lack of drivers. Right? So there are many different parts, many different pieces to this. So keep on being patient. Ask your service providers what they have going on. Don't scream. I know I come out of the industry. Don't scream at your forwarder or broker. It's not their fault. They're just as frustrated as you are. So on that note, I think we can open this up to some questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Always very insightful. Thanks for sharing all of that information. I am not seeing any questions in the chat box. Maybe Tony can help confirm that.